Hello friends, good to see you again through this video. Today I wanted to talk about one question. Are we like Saul or like Jonathan? I wanted to stress these two characters today, like Saul the king, who was the first king of Israel, and Jonathan his son, right? So these two people, they played a big impact, they had big impact in the life of King David, right? Whom we know, the Lord raised him as a king from a shepherd's field, right? So the reason why I wanted to share something about the life of Saul and the life of Jonathan is, we can take some important lessons from their life, like how they had the relationship with David, right? So based on that, we can also learn some important fact for our life today, so that it will help us to understand how we are leading our life today, and what kind of impact it had on their personal life as well. So we wanted to understand something about that. See, when we talk about King Saul first, right, he was actually blessed by the Lord, right? He was chosen by the Lord. God blessed him as the first king of Israel. Like, even though he came from the smallest tribe, but yet God put him in charge of the nation. And, God was so happy that he picked Saul as the first king. But then what happened as Saul disobeyed the Lord, right? Like, that is when the Lord said, I'm going to take away the kingdom from you because you don't, want to listen to my word. You don't want to obey my word, right? So it is at that background we read in 1 Samuel chapter 17 also, the Israelites are now facing this Philistine, right? Like, Goliath. So Goliath is like threatening to really take the kingdom from Saul. I mean, like he's challenging them to send a person to, defeat him. So they are at this juncture. Now David is coming into the scene, right? So they are, so Jonathan and Saul, they first encountered David in that scene, like, where David was facing Goliath. So after David killed Goliath, and then what happened? Saul was so happy, and all the people in Israel, everybody was happy, and they put him in charge. Like they put David in charge of the army, right? Like, he was part of the army. He was given some position, and whenever this army went out, right, and whenever they fought against the Philistines, so they were able to conquer. And day by day, we read in 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 30, it says, David's fame was growing day by day because David was so successful. In whatever the battle that he leads, he was always victorious. So this led to the people, beginning to praise David, right? Like, and they began to shout, what Saul killed 1,000, but David killed 10,000s. So this particular phrase was not liked by Saul. So this was his first step of, bringing that jealousy, the feeling of jealousy into his heart against David. See, just think about Saul. He had kingship, right? He was the ruler of the nation. He had everything. He had power, authority. He had so much luxury. He had people to obey him. In spite of all these blessings, or in spite of all those things, he was not happy about one thing, where when people began to praise a commoner, David was just a commoner. Like, he was not even like such a great person. Like, only then, like, people have been started to know about David. And that point of time, Saul could not handle this praise that people showered upon David. So today, my dear friends, let's think about ourselves. When we are living with our friends, like, when we have our friends, relatives, or co-workers at office, it is always easy to appreciate a person when they are less than our level, or when they are even equal in our level. When I say level, right, could be in our status, education, or whatever it is, that is how world sees. But what happens when a person who is in our same level, when they go above, or when God blesses them with some blessing that we don't have, or like some favor, they find favor in the eyes of the Lord, or they get some promotion, or they get some new blessing. See, that is when our true, feeling for them will come out. Are we able to celebrate with them for that blessing? or for that promotion, or for that, some good things that God is doing in their life? Or are we trying to build a jealousy spirit within ourselves, thinking, why that guy should have this, why that person should get this, I don't have it, or like, what if he grows above me and I look like, I don't want him to grow above me, like that. Feelings start to build up because the seed of jealousy begins to grow in our heart. And that's exactly what happened to Saul, right? On the other hand, if you take the life of Jonathan, right? Actually, Jonathan has to be even more insecure about David, right, than Saul, because Saul was actually already the king, and he knows, like, he still had the power to, do whatever he wants. But Jonathan is like a prince in that time, and he is the one who is about to take over the throne from his father. But for him, David is the direct threat. Then, like, a popular figure, if David has become so popular, then obviously it is going to impact the chances of Jonathan, right? Like, it will definitely do some dent to the prospect of Jonathan becoming the king. But Jonathan took the other route, right? He did not get offended by the praise that David is getting, or he did not get offended by the attention that David is getting, but rather than, Jonathan was very confident about himself. He was secure of being who he was, and also he understood this principle that God's anointing upon David was there to establish kingdom through him. He learned that, he knew for sure that God's hand was with him, and he did not dare to, touch him, or he did not dare to oppose him, or like, think jealous of him, because he knew it was the calling of God upon his life, and he doesn't have anything to do with that, and God will definitely fulfill that in his life. So he understood that very principle, and he was willing to say, I want to be under you, and all I just asking you is, when you become the king, you make sure that you show the honor and respect to my family also. You show the compassion to my family also. That's what he did, a deal, that's the kind of friendship deal that they both had. So, end of the day, how did these two people had their lives? Like, how was the end for these two lives, like for Saul and Jonathan, right? If you see the end of Saul, he was killed in a war, right? And we know in that same war, Jonathan also got killed, because the word of the Lord said that Saul will not have an inheritance, right? The Saul's throne will not be established. So the Lord has to fulfill that word. So Jonathan and Saul got killed on the same day in the same battle. But on the other hand, Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, right? So even though he became lame in an accident and he was living alone in the kingdom, David reached out to him and he brought him to the palace, and he gave him a privilege of sitting in the king's table and having meal with him on a daily basis. So today, my dear friends, this teaches us very important lessons about our life, right? When you and I, when we behave like Saul, right? When we are jealous about what others are getting, when we are jealous about seeing people who are with us growing up, seeing people who are with us, stepping up more than what we could do, that is when we are letting the spirit of Saul, like it's like the spirit of jealousy coming inside of us, and it is only trying to, deviate us from the way of the Lord, and it will incite us to do even more bad things. That is the most important thing we need to understand. On the other hand, when you look at Jonathan's life, Jonathan was willing to sacrifice himself, or willing to, put himself in a number 2 position, or like under the authority of David. He did not see him like, David as a competitor, or he was knowing that he had a different race and I had a different race. So I am not going to compete with him, but I will be happily celebrating him for what God is doing in his life. Because of that kind of attitude, his son Mephibosheth had that great privilege and blessing of sitting in the king's table and having meal with the king on a daily basis. So today it simplifies the story for us, right? So when we live in jealousy, right? In my generation, when I live with a spirit of jealousy in me, and filling with hatred and being critical about people who are going past me, or feeling jealous about people who have been blessed more than me, it impacts me, and also it impacts my next generation. I am putting my next generation also in spot. And that's what happened. Saul lost Jonathan also in the same day, in the same battle, and their line was not able to establish. But what happened to Jonathan's son was, God showed that mercy to that next generation, because Jonathan was willing to serve under David, and Jonathan was willing to acknowledge that I am secure in my race and I want to celebrate what David is doing, and I don't want to be jealous about what God is doing in his life. So when we live in that kind of a spirit where we want to celebrate others for the blessings that God has bestowed upon their life, what will happen? It will come back to our generation, the next generation. Our children will be blessed by those deeds. Sometimes they may be in a dire situation, sometimes they may be in a need, or sometimes they may be in a difficult situation where God will show his favor and his unconditional love upon them, and he will restore them and he will bring them back to the places, right? So today the choice is in our hands. Are we going to live a jealous life, feeling insecure, or feeling uncomfortable when people around us are growing up, when people around us are stepping up, or when people around us are being blessed by the Lord? Are we going to live that kind of a life like Saul did, and face the consequences and face the destructive end, not only for us but also for the next generation? Or the other choice we have is leading a life like Jonathan, where even though we know that we are not going to get the credit, but we are willing to help others to see them grow, or we are willing to celebrate them to see what God is doing in their life. So that is how, when we do, what will happen, it brings the blessing back on us, and also not only us, it will bring the blessing back to our generations. So may the Lord bless this word. You think about this question: are we going to live like a Saul, or are we going to live like a Jonathan? Let's think about it. May the Lord give us the insight to understand this more and more in the days to come. You all have a blessed and a happy day. God bless you.